They called her cursed for being born white as snow, so they threw her into the pit to die. But the night didn't take her. The white vampire king did. What began as vengeance became a bond that defied gods. Because when light rejects you, sometimes darkness saves you. The villagers didn't use rope. Rope was for the guilty, for those who might be pardoned. For her, they used a broken cart door. They slid her across its splintered face, white hair spreading like spilled milk over the wood, and pushed. The door tipped, then dropped over the edge of the ravine. She followed. Air clawed at her throat. Then the ground rose up, a bed of snow that broke her fall with a cruel softness. Her shoulder burst into white-hot fire. For a moment she couldn't breathe. The stars above her blurred into streaks. "Let the pale curse find her kin," someone shouted from above. A man's voice, familiar, hoarse with satisfaction. The priest of purity, perhaps. A woman screamed something about blasphemy. She was silenced with a slap. Then came silence. A wind howled through the cliffs, sweeping loose flakes into her open mouth. She tasted salt and iron. Liora Marin, the pale one, the cursed one, lay still and let the night decide whether to take her. Her lashes, nearly colorless, fluttered against her cheek. Her eyes opened, pink-gray like rosewater, reflecting the moon. For years, she had been told the gods hated her skin, that the light in her hair was stolen from the dead. Now, the villagers had decided to return it. She pressed her fingers to the cut on her cheek. Warmth slicked her glove. When she lifted her hand to look, her blood gleamed silver-pink in the moonlight, strange, luminous. It shimmered once, like frost catching fire, then faded. "Of course," she murmured, voice hoarse and low. "Even my blood wants to mock me." Above, the sound of footsteps faded. The men were leaving. Liora turned her head toward the cliff and saw them as dark silhouettes framed against a bruised violet sky. They looked smaller than she remembered, small and safe in their cruelty. Something moved. Not them. Not wolves. A shadow detached itself from the night and descended the ravine without a sound. The snow did not crunch beneath him. The air seemed to part for him. He landed in a slow bend of knees, tall, white-haired, a cloak that caught the moonlight and returned it tenfold. Skin like marble veined faintly with silver. Eyes, not red, not gold, but both, ringed in ash and fire. "You shouldn't be alive," he said softly, voice like a velvet blade. "They left you to the dark." But it seems the dark declined. Liora tried to push herself upright, failed, and managed a whisper. "Who are you?" He tilted his head, as if the question amused him. "A ghost, if you ask your priests." Then lower. "A king, if you ask the night." His cloak unfurled behind him, pale as crushed shells, lined in a deep shade of blue that drank light. When he crouched before her, she saw his breath in the air, faint, but there. Alive. Undead. Something in between. He reached toward her cheek. She should have flinched, but she didn't. His fingers brushed her skin, smearing the blood there. The mark it left on his glove burned silver, then sank into the fabric like ink into snow. "What are you doing?" she whispered. "Listening," he said. "Your blood speaks louder than most." He studied his hand, where the silver glow had left a faint crescent mark. Then his eyes lifted to hers. "It calls for me." Liora shivered, though not from the cold. "Am I supposed to be afraid of you?" "You should be," he said. "But you're not." A small, humorless smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "That's why I'm here." He rose, offering her his hand. "Stand." "The cold is patient, but I'm not." When she hesitated, he sighed, a sound older than grief. "I am Draven of the Pale Court," he said finally. "White King of the Night Realms." The name hit her like a bell. Every fireside tale she had ever heard had painted that name in fear. Draven, the White Vampire King. The butcher of the old wars. The shadow sovereign who ruled winter itself. And now he was standing in front of her. "Why me?" she asked, though the question was already forming into something else. "Why not me?" Draven extended his hand again, palm up. "Because," he said, You called. And blood remembers who it belongs to. When she took his hand, warmth poured through her. Not like fire, but like moonlight passing through glass. The snow around them hummed, faint and low, a vibration deep in the earth. Above, in the village that had abandoned her, a bell tolled. Below, in the pit of the quarry, something old and watching stirred. Draven looked up toward the sound, his expression unreadable. Your priest, he said quietly, has just committed treason against the blood that rules the night. Then he pulled his cloak from his shoulders and wrapped it around her like a vow. Come, he said, voice soft as falling snow. You'll freeze no more. The wind howled. From the woods beyond, hooves thundered, a cavalry of pale riders materializing like frost-born ghosts. Draven turned toward them, his eyes gleaming. Let's collect what the sun thinks it owns. And as he lifted Liora into his arms, the storm itself seemed to bow. Snow crushed beneath the hooves of 100 spectral horses. Their breath steamed, white as incense in the moonlight. Each rider was wrapped in armor of pale steel, lacquered with frost, banners stitched with silver threads that glimmered faintly with runes of fealty. The white host of the night court had come, and they rode in silence, a tide of winter reclaiming what was denied it. Liora clung to Draven's cloak as he carried her, her face pressed against the cold curve of his shoulder. The storm swirled around them, yet his steps left no sound, no trace. Only a faint trail of mist marked their passage. The world seemed to part for him, bending away from his presence as if it knew better than to resist. She looked up once, over his shoulder, to see her village shrinking in the distance, roofs like hunched backs, windows shuttered against the judgment of the night. She had spent her whole life there, learning to make herself small, learning to bear the glances that whispered, "Why were you born wrong?" Now, as the white host crossed the frozen fields, she realized she felt nothing.
No hatred.
No love. Just an absence. An empty well where belonging should have been. Are they human? She asked, her voice small. Draven's golden ash eyes didn't leave the horizon. They were once. The snow parted as they approached the village gate. The guards on the wall froze, eyes wide, the color draining from their faces. One dropped his spear and ran. The other tried to ring the alarm bell, but the rope snapped in his hand, frozen to brittle threads. Draven stopped before the gates and nodded to the captain who rode beside him, a woman with a shaven head and a scar that glittered like a thin thread of glass from temple to jaw. Listen, he said, voice even. The Hall of Purity. Yes, my king. The captain swung down from her horse, her boots crunching into the snow. Her voice carried like the crack of ice. Purge the pious. The host advanced. Doors slammed. Lights flickered behind windows. But the host didn't run. They moved like an avalanche. Measured, unstoppable, ancient. The villagers scattered as the horses passed, and those who had thrown Liora into the pit now cowered behind their fences. She wanted to look away, but couldn't. Every hoofbeat seemed to echo a truth she had never been allowed to say aloud. You cannot cast out what the dark already owns. The hall's doors yawned open when the first rider struck them with her gauntlet. The wood split with a sound like thunder. Inside, the brazier light flared yellow-orange, casting long shadows across a golden symbol, a sun disk mounted above the altar. The priest stood beneath it, rotund and sweating, his robe the color of bone. His eyes darted to the pale figure entering the doorway, and his mouth twitched into a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Your radiance, he said, forcing a bow. What an honor, what an unexpected consequence, Draven interrupted, his voice calm but cold enough to burn. That's the word you're looking for. He set Liora gently on her feet, steadying her when her knees trembled. The villagers huddled at the back of the hall, whispering prayers that went unanswered. Who cast her out? Draven asked, his voice carrying through the stone chamber. The priest swallowed. She is marked, my lord. The pale sickness, it is corruption. It would taint the bloodlines of the valley.
Corruption?
Draven repeated. He began to walk forward, slow and deliberate. And which law of the Pale Crown defines that word for you? The priest faltered. The scriptures of the dawn, written by frightened men who mistook light for purity, Draven said, his tone almost kind. And by their ignorance, they have made darkness noble. He raised his hand, and the crescent mark from Liora's blood glimmered faintly against his skin. Do you see this, priest? You threw my blood from a cliff. The hall fell silent. Liora felt the air itself change, heavier, expectant. A pulse thudded beneath the floorboards, deep and low, as if the earth were listening. The priest licked his lips. If she bears your mark, then let it be proven. The Office of Sun and Faith has rights for verifying false miracles. We can test her blood for witchcraft.
Ah, Draven murmure.
The kind of test that ends in ashes. He turned slightly, his gaze finding Liora. Would you allow it? Her voice came out steadier than she expected. If he wishes to test me, then let him do it now. Here, before the court of the Pale King. A whisper rippled through the hall. The priest, thinking himself clever, nodded quickly. A drop of blood, then. If it burns, she is cursed. If not, she is pure. Draven gestured to listen, who plucked a small dagger from her belt, its blade engraved with runes of truth. She handed it to Liora hilt first. Your hand, my lady. Liora pricked her thumb. A bead of blood welled up, pink and opalescent, and fell to the floor between them. It didn't burn. It wrote. Lines bloomed across the stone, curling, fluid, silver-white, forming a symbol like a crescent moon wrapped in thorns. The air shimmered, filled with the scent of cold metal and something ancient, holy, and wild. The villagers gasped. The priest stumbled back, his face turning gray. Draven's voice softened to a whisper. The mark of the bloodline of the Pale Throne. He looked up, eyes flashing red. She carries the inheritance you tried to murder. He turned to the priest, all warmth gone from his voice. You will go to the White Convent to learn humility from the stones themselves. Try to flee, and my wolves will make arithmetic of your bones. Listen smiled faintly, snapping iron cuffs around the priest's wrists. Lesson begins at dawn, she said pleasantly. Draven looked back at Liora. The rage in his face melted to something gentler, almost human. You bled, he said quietly. We'll set that shoulder. I can do it, she murmured, though her voice wavered. I've had worse. A flicker of amusement touched his lips. So have I. He offered his arm. Come, little ghost. The night waits for you. As they stepped out of the hall, the villagers parted in silence. Not one dared speak. The girl they had called Curse now walked beneath the moon with the king they had feared since their great-grandfather's time. The world, it seemed, had changed hands. The road stretched north until it vanished into light. Not daylight, the kind of glow born from cold, that pale blue shimmer that seems to come from nowhere and everywhere at once. The white host rode through it in silence, snow hissing under their horses' hooves. At their head, Draven didn't look back once. Liora sat before him on the saddle, his cloak still wrapped around her shoulders. Every few moments, the cold crept through her, only to retreat again, chased off by some quiet pulse that came from his presence. The deeper they rode into the north, the more the air changed, thinner, sharper, scented faintly with iron and frostbite. At last, when she thought the world had become only snow and sky, a shadow rose before them. The Spire of Thorns. It was not a city as humans built them. It was a crown of towers carved directly from a glacier, 20 spears of white stone reaching toward the clouds, linked by bridges that gleamed like ribs of ice. From within the ice itself, light pulsed, slow and alive, like something breathing deep beneath the surface. Liora's breath caught. It's beautiful. Draven's expression didn't change. It's honest. That's rarer. The gates yawned wide, 2 slabs of carved bonewood, each inlaid with sigils that pulsed faintly when Draven passed. The guards knelt without a word, their faces pale, their eyes the same red-gold ring as their king's. As they entered, the wind changed tune. No longer a howl, more like a hum. Liora realized, with a small start, that it was the same low thrumming she had heard under the quarry, beneath her own heartbeat. The sound of the land itself, recognizing its blood. The courtyards were strange, filled with white trees whose branches glittered like glass, fountains that flowed with water, so clear it looked invisible. People watched from balconies, their clothes made of silk and fur, their skin pale as candlelight. Some leaned forward in curiosity. Others hid their faces behind jeweled masks. "They'll stare," murmured Listen beside her. "They always stare at what they don't understand." "I'm used to that," Liora said. "But this is different." Listen's mouth quirked. "It is. Here, they stare because they're wondering if you'll outlive them." The words should have frightened her. They didn't. Draven led her through a corridor that seemed carved from frozen light. The walls shimmered faintly, reflecting them both in 100 softened images. At the far end, a door opened into a vast chamber, its ceiling a dome of clear ice, through which the stars burned bright and cold. "This will be your room," he said, gesturing to the space.
Eat. Rest.
"The court convenes at moonrise." She hesitated. "To test me?" A pause. "To test me," he corrected. Before he could turn away, Listen cleared her throat. "Your shoulder, my king?" He glanced at Liora, then back at the captain. "I'll see to it." When they were alone, the silence deepened until even her heartbeat felt loud. Draven crossed to her, every movement precise, like a man used to containing his strength. "May I?" he asked, and when she nodded, he touched her arm. The moment his fingers pressed against her shoulder, heat flashed through her, sharp and blinding. "Breathe," he murmured. She obeyed. A swift, firm motion, a pop, a white-hot second of agony, then the pain was gone. Her breath came back in shuddering gasps. "You're very practiced at that. War is an efficient teacher." His eyes softened. "So is compassion, when you survive long enough to learn it." She looked up at him. For the first time, she saw not the monster of stories but something else, a loneliness so deep it looked like peace. He stepped back. "Rest, Liora. At moonrise, you'll see what the night expects of you." When the door closed behind him, the hum in the walls deepened again, a low sound like ice stretching under weight. The room breathed. The spire itself seemed to listen. Moonrise came too quickly. Listen arrived to fetch her, dressed in silvered armor that caught every flicker of light. "Don't kneel," she said as they walked. "They'll want you to." "Don't." Liora almost laughed. "Do you give all guests this much warning?" "Only the ones my king seems to care about." They entered the Hall of Thorns, vast, circular, lined with spined pillars that glittered like black glass. At its center, a dais rose from the ice, shaped like a blooming flower frozen mid-open. The air was thick with the scent of steel and snow lilies. At the far end stood 3 figures. The first, draped in onyx and silver, eyes sharp as razors, Lady Ceressa of Black Hollow, regent of the southern courts. The second, an old woman wrapped in shawls of gray wool, her hair white as sea foam, Mother Isa, seer of the glaciers. And beside them, silent as death itself, stood Draven. "My lord," Ceressa said, her voice sweet as honey over broken glass. "The office sends its greetings. They request the human girl be surrendered for sanctified study." Draven didn't move. "Request denied." "Then let her be tested," Ceressa said, smile deepening. "If she truly bears your bloodline, the spire will answer her voice. If not," she shrugged delicately, "the ice knows what to do with liars." Liora's stomach nodded. "And if I fail?" "Then you die quickly," said Isa cheerfully. "The spire is merciful that way." Draven's gaze locked on her. "You don't have to do this." She swallowed. "If I don't, they'll never stop doubting you. I'll do it." She stepped onto the ice. The moment her bare feet touched its surface, a cold like truth shot through her veins. It hurt, but honestly beautifully. The hall dimmed. The pillars began to hum, low and resonant. "Speak," Isa said softly. "Let the spire know your name." Liora closed her eyes. Her voice was a thread of sound, fragile but unwavering. "My name is Liora Marin," she said. "I was cast out for being pale, for being wrong. I bled in the dark, and the night found me worth saving. If the spire will have me, I will keep its peace. If not, I'll die as I lived, uninvited but unbroken." The ice pulsed beneath her feet. The hum rose, higher, deeper. Then, one by one, the pillars of the hall began to sing.
Not words, notes.
Clear, ancient, resonant. Draven's hand went to his chest. The mark on his palm flared white. The same light bloomed across the ice under Leora's feet, a pattern of crescents and thorns intertwining. The spire had answered. Ceres's smile cracked. "Impossible," she whispered. "She's human. She's mine," Draven said softly. The ice thundered in agreement. The echo of the spire's song still trembled in the air when silence fell, that fragile, brittle kind of silence that comes before violence or revelation. Frost drifted from the vaulted ceiling in delicate spirals, catching the glow of the crescent thorn sigil now blazing beneath Leora's feet. Every vampire in the chamber stared, their masks of poise beginning to crack. Even the marble floor seemed to hum with the echo of her name. Draven stood utterly still. His face was unreadable, but his hand, the one marked by her blood, trembled once before he closed it into a fist. The spire had recognized her, and the court had no idea what to do with that. Lady Ceresa of Black Hollow stepped forward, her lips curling in a smile that didn't reach her eyes. The jewels in her hair tinkled like tiny bells, each sound a reminder of her precision, her calculation. "Well," she purred, "the ice sings for her." How quaint. But song does not make sovereignty. "Nor does envy," murmured Draven without looking at her. Her smile tightened. "Your Majesty, you of all beings should know our laws. If she is to be named as your bond, your fated mate, as your kind so romantically call it, she must face the night's call. The rite is ancient, binding, final." Mother Issa chuckled low in her throat, like the rasp of branches against stone. "The old customs again. Always the claws come out when a crown feels nervous." Draven's voice turned cold. "This court will not demand blood from her to satisfy its boredom." Ceresa tilted her head. "It's not boredom, my king. It's law. And if she truly carries your blood, the spire itself will keep her safe. Or," she paused delicately, "it will reject her." The chamber breathed as one, slow, hungry, the kind of breath that feeds on spectacle. Liora stood very still. She could feel the pulse of the spire through her feet, the hum of living stone whispering along her bones. "What happens," she asked quietly, "if the spire rejects me?" Ceresa's eyes gleamed like polished knives. "It takes what does not belong to it." Issa sighed. "That's an old way of saying it eats you." Draven's voice came low and sharp. "Enough." He turned to Liora, the fury in his eyes smothered beneath something heavier. Fear, maybe. Or something close to it. "You owe them nothing," he said. "I can end this with a word." Liora shook her head. "If you do, they'll call me your weakness. If I stand, they'll have to call me something else." That silenced him. The spire's hum rose again, faint but insistent, as if even the ancient ice wanted to hear her answer. Draven exhaled slowly. "Then if you do this," he said, his voice soft, "you do it with me." They stood together at the edge of the dais. The court gathered in a perfect half-circle, pale faces, jewel-laden robes, whispers slithering like snakes through snow. Listen stood just behind Liora, her expression grim and proud. The ice beneath their feet was no longer still. It rippled faintly, alive with light. Mother Issa raised her gnarled staff and tapped it once against the ground. The sound spread like thunder under glass. "The night's call," she intoned, "is the oldest bond between king and mate. It is the test of will, of truth, of blood. Speak, and the spire will answer. Lie, and it will devour." Ceresa smiled thinly. "Begin." Liora stepped forward. Her bare feet stung against the ice. Draven followed, his cloak whispering behind him like a second heartbeat. Their reflections shimmered beneath the frozen surface, pale, distant, threaded together by light. "Say what you are," Issa said softly. "Let the ice decide if it believes you." Leora's breath fogged in front of her. She felt the spire's hum deepening, an ancient presence waiting to weigh her words. "I am Liora Marin," she said, voice steady. "Born in shadow, cast out for the light in my skin. I was left to die, but the night claimed me. If the spire will have me, I will guard it as fiercely as it guarded me." Her voice faded. For a heartbeat, nothing moved. Then the ice cracked, a delicate, sharp sound. A web of pale light spread beneath her feet, curling outward like vines of frost. The court gasped. Draven's mark flared white-hot against his skin, and he stepped closer, his shadow falling over her. The ice between them glowed brighter, and the sigil beneath their feet merged, two crescents forming one perfect ring of light. The spire roared. Wind blasted through the hall, sweeping the torches sideways. The mirrors along the walls shattered one by one, reflecting 1,000 fragments of silver light. When it was done, only two figures remained untouched at the dais' center, Liora and Draven. The light between them pulsed once, then sank into the ice. Mother Issa's laughter broke the silence first, raspy, delighted. "The spire accepts. The bond is sealed." The court murmured, half in awe, half in disbelief. Ceressa's painted mouth curved, but her eyes glittered with cold fury. "How touching," she said softly. "But you forget, my king. A bond half-forged is a bond half-vulnerable. It must be completed. The old rites demand it." Her words dropped like stones into the quiet. Even the guards stirred uneasily. Draven's jaw tightened. "We complete what we choose, not what you demand." Ceressa inclined her head, her smile the exact shape of a blade being sheathed. "Of course. But the court will not wait forever." Leora's heart thudded once, hard. She didn't fully understand the ritual Ceressa meant, but she heard the warning beneath it. Half a bond could be broken, and broken bonds bled kingdoms dry. As the courtiers filed out, whispering like dry leaves, Issa lingered beside her. The old seer's eyes, sharp and kind, searched Leora's face. "You've woken something," she murmured. "The spire's heart hasn't sung like that in 100 winters." "Is that good?" Issa's smile was small. "Good or bad is for people who think they get to stop a story halfway." Draven turned to Liora as the hall emptied, leaving only their shadows stretched long across the floor. "You shouldn't have done that," he said quietly. "You told me I didn't have to." "Exactly," he said. "And still you did." For a moment, they stared at each other, the air between them alive with heat that had nothing to do with blood or ritual. Then he turned away, cloak swirling.
Rest.
"The spire's song isn't done with us yet." Liora watched him leave, the sound of his boots fading into the distance. Beneath her, the ice still hummed faintly, not threatening, not angry, just awake. And somewhere deep below the spire, in the frozen dark where no light reached, something ancient stirred, answering the same call that had brought Draven to a dying girl in a pit. The nights that followed were carved from frost and silence. The spire no longer slept. Its walls hummed faintly, a slow, pulsing sound that rose and fell like a heartbeat. Liora would wake in the small hours to find pale light crawling along the veins of the ice, running like living veins through the floor. It never frightened her, not truly. The sound wasn't hostile. It was curious. Watching. Remembering. She began to dream in its rhythm. Sometimes she dreamed of the quarry, but not as it had been. In her dreams, the pit was filled with stars instead of snow, and the shadow that had caught her was not Draven but something older, vast and silver-eyed. It would whisper words she didn't understand, syllables that curled like smoke and vanished when she woke. Each dawn, she wrote what she remembered in a small notebook the steward had left on her table. "The ice knows my name. There's something beneath us that breathes. It's not asking to be free. It's asking to be heard." When she told Mother Issa, The old seer only laughed. The spire listens hardest to those it likes. Just don't mistake curiosity for comfort, child. Ice remembers everything, especially promises. Draven visited rarely. When he did, it was always late, the kind of late that feels stolen when the halls were empty and even the walls seemed to hold their breath. He came to speak of politics, though his voice betrayed the exhaustion of someone holding too much in place. "The regents want to summon the southern courts," he said one night, leaning against the balcony rail, his pale hair catching the starlight. "Saressa whispers that I've lost the favor of the office. They think to test my authority through you. They want to hurt you through me," Liora corrected softly. He looked at her then, that sharp, assessing gaze that always seemed to weigh every truth like a weapon. "They can't. The spire saw you." She smiled faintly. "You don't sound convinced. I've lived too long to confuse miracles with safety." Liora hesitated before speaking again. "You said once that the spire keeps something beneath it. Something that feeds on law and blood. What did you mean?" Draven's gaze drifted to the frozen expanse below, where the ice glowed faintly from within. "Long ago," he said, "before my line ruled, the pale throne was a wound in the world. The first king bound the hunger that lived here, sealed it beneath the glacier with blood. Since then, the spire's light has kept it dreaming. But dreams fade when the world forgets their reason. So, if the world stops believing in your rule," he finished for her, voice low, "the hunger wakes. And it does not wake kindly." Liora said nothing. The hum beneath her feet seemed louder now, almost like laughter, quiet, knowing, old. Days bled into nights that were too short. The court buzzed with whispers. The human girl who commands the spire, the mortal who bound the White King's heart. Listen became her reluctant shadow, half bodyguard, half confidant. The captain never smiled, but she respected Liora with the wary trust of a soldier who has seen too many false gods. "You're making them nervous," Listen said one morning as they walked the training terrace overlooking the lower valley. "Because I exist? Because you make him human," Listen said. "They don't know what to do with that." Liora paused, looking out over the glittering expanse of snow. "And what about you? What do you think I am?" Listen's mouth twitched. "A disruption. But not all disruptions are bad. Sometimes the world needs a crack before the light gets in." That night, Liora found a gift on her table, a short dagger of carved bone, its hilt wrapped in black leather. A note in Listen's neat, angular hand read, "For when staring back isn't enough." The first attack came 2 nights later. A servant brought wine to her chambers, a timid girl with a braid, so tight it gleamed like wire. Liora almost thanked her, but then she noticed something wrong. The sound of her steps didn't match her breath. Listen had taught her to listen for that, the small, human inconsistencies that betray intent. "Stop," Liora said softly. The servant hesitated. "Put it down." When the tray touched the table, the wine shimmered faintly blue in the light. Liora didn't need to taste it. "Who sent you?" The girl trembled. "And no one, my lady." The lie fractured under its own weight. The girl's eyes rolled back. She screamed once, high and thin, before black smoke poured from her mouth. It twisted upward, taking shape, a spectral figure with no face, no voice, only hunger. Liora grabbed the dagger. "You don't belong here," she whispered. The shadow lunged. The spire reacted before she could. A surge of light exploded from the floor, blindingly bright. The shadow shrieked, its form unraveling like burnt paper until only ash remained. When her vision cleared, Draven was in the doorway, sword half-drawn, eyes burning like wildfire in snow. "Are you hurt?" "No," she said, her voice shaking. "But she was just a servant." "She was bait," he said grimly. "And the office has grown bold." Listen appeared seconds later, 2 of her guards dragging a trembling priest in chains. The man's lips were cracked, his eyes hollow with fanaticism. "I was only cleansing the impurity," he spat. "The sun commands." Draven's voice cut like frost. "The sun commands nothing here." He gestured, and the guards hauled the man away. Liora sank into her chair, heart pounding. The hum of the spire had grown stronger, a steady, resonant tone that seemed to pulse with her heartbeat. Draven knelt beside her, his face softer now. "You did well." "I was terrified." "Good," he said quietly. "Courage is what you do when you're terrified." He hesitated, then brushed his gloved fingers against her wrist, a fleeting touch, almost uncertain. "If they come again, you call me. No matter the hour." "I didn't know kings answered calls." His smile was faint, tired, real. "Only yours." Later that night, when she couldn't sleep, Liora stood at her window and looked out over the glacier. The wind carried a sound, a low, rhythmic rumble that felt too deep to be mere weather. "Hungry." The word brushed her mind like a whisper. She touched the ice. It pulsed once under her hand, like something vast turning over in its sleep. "Not yet," she whispered back. "Not while I'm here." And somewhere far below, the thing beneath the spire went still for now. The next moonrise came red. Even through the spire's high lattice windows, the light carried color, a sickly blush that painted the snowfields like spilled wine. The courtiers called it an omen. The servants whispered it was punishment. And in the long corridors carved from living ice, the old hum deepened into something restless, almost a growl. Liora felt it before she saw it. That low pressure behind the ribs, the sense of another heartbeat hiding inside her own. Something beneath the palace had begun to stir. She found Draven in the war hall, pacing before a map carved directly into the floor. Lines of silver light traced territories across the glacier, the outer provinces, the northern wolf holds, the southern courts. They glowed faintly where rebellion simmered. "They've united behind Ceresa," he said without turning. "She promises a world ruled by daylight. The office feeds her gold and priests. Together, they plan to march before the thaw." Liora stepped closer. "Can they really fight you?" His smile was sharp, humorless. "Not for long. But they don't need to win. They only need to bleed us. And if the ice breaks before we end them," he gestured toward the floor beneath them, "then the thing beneath wakes hungry." "The hunger," she said softly. "The blight," he corrected. "It has other names, but that's the oldest one. The first king sealed it down there with the blood of his line. That's why the Pale Kings must always be crowned here, at the spire. Without the bond, without law." He didn't finish. He didn't have to. She could hear it, the faint echo through the ice, like something large turning over in its sleep. Liora touched the glowing lines on the map, tracing their pattern. "You said it feeds on blood and law. But law changes, doesn't it? And blood." He looked up at her sharply. "Changes, too. That's what frightens them. You've already changed both." The hum underfoot grew worse at night. Liora began wandering the spire's lower corridors, lantern in hand, following the whisper of water frozen inside the walls. Once, she found a door she didn't recognize, small, plain, built of stone instead of ice. She pushed it open and found a spiral staircase leading down into dark. The air below was older. It smelled of minerals and old salt, the scent of a sea that had forgotten itself. Her lantern's light glimmered off shards embedded in the walls, crystal bones, perhaps. Or teeth. At the bottom, a cavern opened wide. The floor wasn't solid ice here. It was glassy, translucent. Beneath it, she saw shadows moving slowly. Long shapes that might have been chains or rivers of light. In the center of the floor was a hollow ring, half buried in frost, carved with symbols she recognized from the mark on Draven's palm. She knelt beside it. The hum filled her head like wind trapped in a bell. Her name whispered back to her in the air, Liora. She reached out, then stopped as a voice echoed behind her. "Curious little ghost," said Draven quietly. He'd followed her. No armor, no crown, just that impossible stillness, like a wolf pretending to be human. "You shouldn't be here." "I wanted to see it." She stood slowly, brushing ice dust from her skirts. "This is where it's bound, isn't it?" He nodded once. "That circle holds the Blight's name. Or rather, the memory of it. Every 1,000 winters, It tries to remember the rest. And if it succeeds? His eyes were like stormlight. It starts to feed again. Liora looked down at the shadows moving beneath the ice. Does it talk to you? Not anymore, he said. It prefers new voices. She realized what he meant. It's speaking to me. His jaw tightened. Of course it is. It's never heard blood like yours before. Half human, half marked by the throne. You're a key it's never tasted. And you think it wants to use me. I know it does. He stepped closer, close enough that the frost halo of his breath mingled with hers. If it whispers, don't answer. Promise me that. She wanted to, but part of her, the part that had always been hungry for belonging, for understanding, couldn't promise what she didn't believe. Instead, she said softly, maybe it's not only hunger. Maybe it's loneliness. Draven's face changed at that. For a heartbeat, he looked almost afraid. Don't give it sympathy, Liora. The last woman who pitted it ended a kingdom. He turned and walked away, leaving her with the echo of his words. For a long time, she stood there, the hum vibrating in her bones. Then, from far below, the whisper came again. Not in words. In meaning. Aren't you lonely too? She pressed her palms against the ice, hard enough to sting. I'm not yours, she whispered. The hum softened, fading back into stillness.
For now.
When she returned to her chambers, Listen was waiting, half a scowl, half concern. You've been below, she said flatly. Yes. Listen swore under her breath. That's sacred ground. Even the king doesn't linger there. I needed to see it, Liora said. I needed to understand what they're all so afraid of. Listen's hand tightened on her sword hilt. We're afraid because it doesn't stay asleep forever. And when it wakes, it doesn't choose sides. It just devours. Then why not destroy it? Because the day we do, we destroy the spire. And without the spire, there's nothing to keep the night alive. Liora sat heavily on the edge of her bed. The hum followed her even here now, faint but constant. The world feels like it's cracking, she murmured. Listen's voice softened. That's what happens when old gods start listening again. The next morning brought snow that never melted. It drifted through the upper corridors even though the windows were closed, settling in thin layers of frost over the tapestries. Servants whispered that the spire was weeping, that the hunger below had begun to dream of warmth. Draven summoned the council. They argued in circles until one of the regents slammed his fist against the table. If your human mate has brought this curse, let her be sacrificed to end it. Draven didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. The air went still, and frost bloomed across the regent's throat, sealing his next word into silence. My mate, he said, is the reason the spire still stands. He left before anyone dared answer. That night, Liora found him in the under-ice gallery, the same place she had met the shadows. He was standing at the center of the circle, his head bowed, hands open. The crescent mark on his palm burned white.
You're bleeding, she said.
He looked up, startled, then glanced at his palm. The light dimmed as if embarrassed. Old wounds, he said. The spire calls to all who bear its crown. I'm just answering. She stepped closer. It's not calling for you. I know, he said. It's calling for us. The hum deepened again. Somewhere beneath their feet, the ice groaned, a slow, massive sound, as if something enormous had just drawn breath. Draven reached out and took her hand. Their marks met, light flowing between them. The glow ran outward along the floor like water seeking cracks. The blight stirred. For a heartbeat, Liora thought she heard words, ancient and broken, half drowned in time. One blood, one bond, one door. Then the glow vanished, leaving only silence. Draven's hand tightened on hers. It's beginning, he whispered. They've opened the breach somewhere. Saressa or the priests. They're trying to wake it. Then we close it, Liora said. He looked at her, eyes fierce and proud. Together. And as the red moon sank behind the towers, the spire of thorns trembled, as if something beneath it had started to remember its name. The next dawn never fully arrived. The horizon bruised violet and stayed there, as if the sun had grown weary of climbing. The spire's glow dimmed to a colorless haze, and a cold wind rolled through the halls that smelled of old stone and secrets unburied. Liora awoke to the sound of bells, not the melodic chime of ceremony, but the harsh, uneven tolling of alarm. Her breath fogged before she even rose from bed. The floor trembled. The hum that had haunted her dreams now screamed in her skull, a sound like the world tearing at its seams. She grabbed her cloak and ran. The corridors were chaos, guards shouting, servants scattering, torches flaring and dying as they passed. The frost climbing the walls was darker now, veined with something that looked disturbingly like ink. Listen appeared out of the storm of panic, sword drawn, her expression carved from fury. "Stay with me," she barked. "The spire's foundation has cracked." "What happened?" Liora demanded. "The southern wing. The seals failed." The blight's breath came through the stone. They raced toward the heart of the spire, where Draven and the council had gathered. The great hall no longer shimmered. Its walls bled slow rivulets of dark water. Even the air smelled wrong, coppery thick, alive. At the center, Draven stood among his regents, his expression colder than the ice itself. His cloak was half torn, his hair unbound, his right hand glowing faintly where the crescent thorn mark pulsed like a living thing. "Ceres's doing," Listen hissed, stepping beside him. Draven didn't deny it. She opened a sanctum beneath the southern baths. A blood circle, office maid. They thought to summon purity. They summoned hunger instead. As if answering his words, the ground shuddered violently. A deep, rolling vibration that cracked the flagstones. The chandeliers above them swayed, their light scattering in shattered rainbows across the ice. Liora grabbed a pillar to steady herself. How far did it spread? Draven's gaze flicked toward her, a glance heavy with meaning, with fear he refused to name. Farther than it ever should. The circle links to the chamber below the spire, to the very seal you saw. Listen swore. If the circle below breaks. It won't. Liora cut in, her voice sharper than she intended. We'll stop it. Draven's jaw tightened. We. Yes, we, she said, stepping closer. You said it yourself, it calls for both of us. Then it's both of us who'll answer. The hall erupted in protest. Vampires hissed warnings, priests muttered prayers, regents pleaded with Draven to command her back into her chamber. But he silenced them with a raised hand. Enough, he said, his voice low, deadly calm. No one else goes below. The spire listens to her now, not me. If anyone can quiet what's waking, it's Liora. Listen's mouth twisted, but she nodded. Then you'll need protection. I'll lead the guard. Draven shook his head.
No.
If the ice breaks, no sword will hold it back. This isn't war. It's negotiation. They descended into the under-ice gallery together, Draven, Liora, and Issa the Seer, whose staff glowed faintly with runes that flickered like dying stars. The deeper they went, the louder the hum became. It wasn't a sound anymore but a pressure, a living pulse that throbbed through their bones. The air shimmered, thick with mist and a metallic scent like burnt silver. When they reached the lowest chamber, Liora stopped breathing. The seal had split. The glassy floor that once shimmered with runes now crawled with veins of shadow, writhing like smoke trapped under ice. In the center, the ring of symbols pulsed erratically, bleeding light and darkness in equal measure. And beneath it, deeper than sight, something vast was moving. A voice, more felt than heard, rolled through the chamber. You called me home. Draven's hand found her arm, steadying. Don't listen, he said. It lies. But Liora wasn't sure it did. The voice wasn't cruel. It was sorrowful, immense, tired. I was bound by kings who feared what they could not understand. Who are you? She whispered. The shadows swelled, pressing against the ice until spiderweb cracks spread outward. A promise forgotten. Draven drew his sword, though what he meant to strike was unclear. Enough, he shouted into the dark. You will not feed here again. The voice laughed, a sound like glaciers breaking. You cannot command hunger, child of ash. The cracks widened. A spear of black ice shot upward, striking the ceiling and showering them with shards. Liora stumbled back. Her hand brushed Draven's, and their marks flared in unison. A light so bright it drowned the dark for an instant. The blight recoiled, hissing. Issa planted her staff into the ice. "It knows you both," she said through gritted teeth. "It smells its jailer's blood, and it's starving for it." Draven turned to Liora, voice ragged. "We have to close it.
Now.
Use the mark, will the light into it. Think of the vow you made." Liora knelt by the seal, her hands trembling as she pressed her palms flat to the ice. The marks burned through the frost. The hum rose to a shriek, shaking the chamber. "Home," she whispered, echoing the word he'd once given her. "Stay home." The light pulsed outward, weaving through the cracks like threads of silver. For a moment, it worked, the darkness faltered. Then something struck from beneath, a tendril of pure shadow wrapping around her wrist, pulling her hand down. The light dimmed, her vision filled with white pain. Draven roared, slicing through the tendril. The sword burned where it touched the dark, but it held. "You can't hold it alone," Issa cried. "It's feeding through the breach." Draven looked at Liora, his eyes bright and fierce. "There's another way." "What way?" she gasped. He didn't answer. He only pressed his marked hand to hers, forcing their palms together. The marks merged, not light, not dark, but both. A current shot through her. The hum turned into a voice, singing now, 1,000 whispers layered together. One blood, one bond, one door. The chamber shook violently. The cracks stopped spreading. The shadow's movement slowed, confused. Draven smiled faintly, even as blood began to trickle from his nose. "The bond wants balance," he said hoarsely. "So it takes what it needs." She realized what he meant. "No," she said, panic flooding her. "You'll die if it takes too much." He managed a ghost of a smile. "You forget who taught me not to be afraid of dying." The light flared. For one endless heartbeat, she saw him illuminated, not the king, not the vampire, but the man beneath it all. Then his hand went still in hers. The seal blazed white. The darkness screamed and vanished, sucked back into the depths. When the light faded, the chamber was silent again. Liora fell forward, gasping, Draven's weight heavy against her shoulder. His eyes were closed, his mark dim, but the seal beneath them was whole. The hum had quieted to a heartbeat again, slow, calm, satisfied. Mother Issa limped forward, kneeling beside them. "He's not gone," she said, touching his chest. "But he's paid the price. Half his soul is with the seal now." Liora looked down at him, her throat burning. "Then I'll go get it back." Issa's gaze softened. "Then, child, you'll have to descend deeper than kings ever dared." Above them, the spire shuddered once more, not breaking, but breathing. And far away, in the shattered southern halls, Saressa watched the light fade and smiled, whispering to the empty air. "Good. Now all that's left is to take what's left of him." The spire did not sleep. It mourned. For 3 nights, its halls wept slow rivulets of melted frost that refroze into delicate webs of ice, as if the palace itself were trying to stitch its own wounds closed. The torches flickered blue, and the air smelled faintly of silver and ash. Every few hours, the ice beneath Liora's feet thrummed, weakly, like a heart laboring after loss. Draven lay unmoving in his chambers. His body looked almost peaceful, too pale even for him. When Liora touched his face, the mark on his palm flared faintly in answer, pulsing once before fading again. His soul, Mother Issa said, was tethered deep within the seal, bound to the very thing he had fought to contain. "He's alive," Issa murmured, adjusting the runes carved into the bedside ice. "But he's between worlds. The spire keeps him half here, half below." "Then I'll go below," Liora said simply. "Listen," standing guard near the door, tensed. "You can't." The lower sanctum's collapsing, the ice down there's breathing wrong. The hunger doesn't breathe wrong, Liora replied softly. It breathes different. It's calling. Listen's jaw clenched. If you go alone. Liora nodded. I expected nothing else. The way down was nothing like before. Where once the stairways had shimmered clean and luminous, they were now streaked with black frost, veins of glassy shadow pulsing with faint red light. The air grew colder, but heavier, almost wet. Each breath felt like drinking a memory she didn't want. Halfway down, she found the corpses of 3 priests, office fanatics, their blood frozen into dark spires that had pierced the walls when they died. The symbols carved into their arms were the same runes Ceresa had etched into the summoning circle. Liora paused only long enough to close their eyes. When she reached the under-ice gallery, the seal glowed faintly beneath its new cracks. The hum that once filled her ears was gone. The silence wasn't peaceful, it was waiting. Draven, she whispered, her voice echoing like a lost thing. The mark on her palm tingled. She followed its pull to the center of the chamber, where the floor shimmered faintly with reflected light. Her reflection wavered. Then it blinked. Not her face.
His.
Draven's image rippled through the ice. Eyes closed, mouth moving soundlessly, caught beneath the surface like a man drowning in glass. She dropped to her knees. I'm here, she said, pressing her hand flat against the seal. I'm coming. The ice didn't break. It breathed. A voice, not the blights, but the ice itself, whispered through her bones. To reach what is lost, you must cross what is forbidden. The world tilted. The air thinned. Her mark flared once, searing white, and then the floor gave way. She fell through cold and light and silence. When she landed, the ground was soft, not snow, not earth, something stranger. The air glowed faintly with drifting particles, like dust made of light. Above her, the spire was gone. Around her stretched a cavern that felt endless, walls shimmering with trapped memories. Frozen within them, she saw shapes, people, creatures, entire moments captured mid-breath. Kings kneeling, wolves howling. A woman with white hair and eyes of molten silver, her hand raised as if to ward off something unseen. The first pale queen. You shouldn't be here, said a voice behind her. Liora turned and saw herself, or almost herself. Taller, paler, eyes the color of red gold fire. The other Liora smiled faintly. You're the echo, the one born too late. I'm not an echo, Liora said. The other tilted her head. Then prove it. Wake him. She stepped aside, and behind her stood the thing that filled the cavern, the blight. It wasn't a monster. Not exactly. It was a shape without a shape, a shadow with bones of light. It pulsed and rippled, constantly shifting between human and inhuman. Every time she looked directly at it, it changed. You are the voice beneath, Liora said, her throat dry. The hunger. It laughed softly, a sound like thawing rivers. Hunger is what they called me when they could no longer name what they feared. What are you then? I am the bond between everything that eats and everything that lives. It leaned closer, its outline flickering into that of a man with hair like snow. Once, I was the world's warmth. Until your kind buried me here to keep their thrones cold. Leora's pulse thundered. You were sealed because you devoured kingdoms. They offered themselves, the blight said simply. You call it destruction. I call it merging. You fear the end of borders. I am the end of between. She shook her head. You can't have him. I already do, it murmured. The king is half of me now. He sleeps in my breath. But you, it leaned close enough for the air itself to hum. You are the bridge, the flaw and the cure. Come closer, and I will give him back. You need only open the seal fully. Let us out. Let us be whole. The sound of its voice was intoxicating. She could feel her bones vibrating with it, her heartbeat sinking to its rhythm. Behind the words, she heard Draven's faint voice, a whispering echo. Don't listen. She took a step forward anyway. The ground pulsed under her. Light spilled from the cracks in her skin where the mark glowed too bright. Her reflection in the ice wasn't hers anymore. It was Ceresa's, smiling. You would free it, Ceresa's voice hissed to her ear, though the woman wasn't there. You would burn the world for one man. Liora bit down a cry. You already did, she whispered back, then plunged her hands into the ice. Pain tore through her like lightning. The light surged outward, connecting to Draven's silhouette beneath the surface. His eyes opened. Liora, he said, his voice hoarse and heavy with awe. You shouldn't. She cut him off. We share the bond. You gave it half your soul. I'll give the rest. The blight screamed, a noise so loud it shattered the frozen walls. The ghosts trapped within the ice dissolved into light. Leora's mark burned white-hot, the glow consuming her hand, her arm, her chest. The cavern filled with the sound of rushing wind, the sound of something vast and ancient being torn apart. Draven's hand reached up from beneath the ice, grasping hers. For an instant, the world held its breath. Then everything went white. When the light faded, the cavern was gone. The blight's hum had vanished, replaced by silence, so deep it almost rang. Liora lay on the cold floor, half buried in frost. Her mark was dim now, faint as moonlight. Beside her, Draven knelt, breathing hard, eyes burning gold again. You pulled me back, he said softly. You owe me a thank you, she whispered. He gave a breath of laughter that turned into a sigh. You did what no Pale King ever dared. I didn't have a choice. He looked at her, a strange tenderness in his voice. You always had one. That's what makes you dangerous. He helped her to her feet. The chamber was empty now, no shadows, no hum, only faint, glowing veins of light sealed back into the ice. The blight, she asked. Silent, Draven said. Maybe sleeping again. Maybe, he glanced down, listening to a new song. As they climbed back toward the spire, Liora could swear she still heard a whisper beneath their feet. Not pleading, not hungry, grateful. Above, the night sky was clear for the first time in weeks. The red tint was gone. The spire glowed faintly gold at its crown. But not all was quiet. In the southern courtyard, banners burned. Wolves howled from the ridges. The scent of smoke and treachery filled the air. Listen ran to meet them, armor slick with blood. Ceresa has taken the lower gates, she shouted. She's claiming the throne in your death, my king. The office has joined her. Draven's eyes went cold. Then let them come. He turned to Liora, his mark blazing alive again. This ends tonight. The first scream came before the bells. By the time the alarm sounded through the spire's upper halls, the courtyard was already on fire. Flames licked up the ivory gates, blue fire, the kind that burned cold. Above the smoke, banners of the Office of the Sun cracked like whips in the wind, their sigils melting into molten gold. The sky had turned orange-red. Snow hissed as it fell into the blaze. Draven and Liora emerged from the under-ice stairway just as the first wall of soldiers breached the western arch. The clash of steel on ice rang through the city, like a song the world wasn't meant to hear. Wild, discordant, unstoppable. At their head rode Lady Ceresa of Black Hollow, her gown now plated with armor the color of moonlight tarnished with blood. A crown of thorns and pearls rested in her hair, glimmering as she raised her sword toward the spire's gates. Your reign ends tonight, Shadow King, she called, her voice carrying like a curse. The sun rises for those who bow to no night. Draven's reply was almost gentle. Then dawn will die with you. The white host poured from the northern towers, their armor gleaming pale in the inferno's light. Wolves rode alongside the vampire knights, massive, spectral beasts whose howls shook the bridges. Listen led the vanguard, her blade already blackened with blood. Liora could see the tide turning, not yet in their favor, but balanced on a knife edge. Every clash of blades sent sparks through the frost, every death froze the air around it. But this was no ordinary siege. Ceresa's army did not bleed properly. Wherever her soldiers fell, their wounds smoked, and from the smoke, new shapes crawled out, shadows wearing the memory of flesh. Their eyes glowed like dying stars. They fought without fear, without pain, without pause. The office gave them death and called it purity, Draven said, voice low. They've bound their souls to the blight's residue. Then we fight ghosts, Liora whispered. Worse, he said. We fight belief. The battle spilled into the Hall of Thorns. The great stained mirrors shattered as fire and frost collided, shards raining like glass rainbows onto the marble. The spire groaned under the weight of magic and metal, ancient laws straining against new sin. Draven fought like the winter he ruled, precise, unstoppable, almost silent. Each swing of his blade left trails of frost in the air. But even he could not be everywhere at once. Saressa advanced through the chaos, unhurried, elegant as always. The ice didn't seem to touch her. The fire bowed away from her path. She moved like someone walking toward inevitability. When she reached the dais, she smiled, cruel, calm, certain. Still alive. How disappointing. I had hoped your martyrdom might make this cleaner. Liora stepped forward before Draven could. You opened the breach. You almost destroyed the world. I offered it salvation, Saressa said. A god that does not punish, only consumes. The office will rule through peace once hunger takes its throne. You should have thanked me, little ghost. I gave your kind purpose again. Leora's mark burned through her sleeve, a crescent of light. You call that peace? I call it order, Saressa snapped. The kind you'll never understand. Draven's voice cut through them both. You've mistaken worship for power. Let me remind you of the difference. He raised his sword, but Saressa didn't flinch. Instead, she flung something to the ground, a shard of black crystal, pulsing faintly with trapped light. The floor shook. The seal. The shard was a piece of the Blight's prison, stolen, twisted, bound with holy symbols. The moment it hit the ice, it began to spread. Dark veins raced across the floor, cracking the marble. Every god needs a body, Saressa whispered. Shall we give it one? The shadows from her dead soldiers screamed, coalescing into a single mass. The spire's light flickered. The hum returned, low and furious. Draven grabbed Leora's arm. The seal's breaking again. Worse this time. Can we stop it? His eyes, red gold and burning, met hers. Not without you. The ceiling above them groaned and split. A column of light, half gold, half black, speared upward through the tower, punching into the night sky. The storm froze midair, flakes hung motionless. The air warped, gravity bending like heat over sand. Through it, Liora saw eyes, vast, luminous, full of mourning. The Blight was awake. Saressa knelt in the center of the chaos, her hands raised, hair whipping around her face. I give you my shape, she screamed. Take me. Let the night bow to the day. The Blight obliged. It poured through her in a torrent of light and shadow, filling her body like a vessel too small for its god. Her scream turned to laughter. When she rose, her eyes were void. Draven moved first. He hurled his blade. It struck her heart and froze halfway through, caught in the air by invisible force. The air shattered around her as if made of glass. You can't kill what the world has already claimed, she said, voice echoing in two tones. But I can unmake what you love. The Blight inside her turned its gaze on Liora. The mark on Leora's palm flared, answering, rejecting, remembering. The spire's hum rose in pitch until it became unbearable. Draven caught her hand.
Liora.
Remember the vow. The vow. The night keeps its own. Their joined marks burned brighter than the fire around them. The air roared. The spire answered with a sound like thunder shaped into music. Light burst outward, white and gold, intertwined. It slammed into Saressa, driving her backward. She screamed as the Blight within her recoiled, trying to escape the purity of its own reflection. You can't bind me twice, she howled. Then we'll burn with you, Liora said. She pressed her other hand to the floor, willing the spire to listen. The ice beneath her cracked, but not with ruin. The cracks formed words, symbols, runes of binding. Her blood filled them, glowing silver. Draven knelt beside her, pressing his palm to hers again. Together, they spoke the old words, words the first king had buried and the Blight had never forgotten. Hunger, come home. Peace, remember your name. The air fractured. Ceres's body split into light and darkness, then nothing. The column of fire collapsed inward, pulling the shadow with it. The hall imploded with the sound of an ocean being swallowed. When the light cleared, only the two of them remained at the dais' center. Draven's head bowed. His armor smoked, his cloak burned away. But his eyes were steady. It's done. Liora looked around. The spire was still standing, scarred, cracked, alive. The fires outside had dimmed. Listen appeared in the doorway, bloodied but grinning. The office forces are retreating. They're gone, my king. Draven turned to Liora, his gaze softening. Our king, you mean, he corrected. Listen saluted and disappeared back into the smoke. The spire's hum was calm now, not the restless vibration of hunger, but a slow, deep rhythm. The sound of breath, the sound of peace. Liora touched the fractured floor where Ceres had stood. Frost bloomed from her fingertips, sealing the cracks. She's gone. Draven nodded. The Blight sleeps again, this time bound to mercy instead of fear. Mercy, Liora repeated, almost disbelieving. From a creature that called itself hunger. He smiled faintly. You taught it the difference. They stood there amid the ruin, light from the still-burning ice spilling around them. For the first time since she'd fallen into the quarry, Liora felt warm. Outside, the dawn returned, pale, slow, cautious. The sun rose without rebellion. The war ended not with triumph, but with silence. For the first time in centuries, the spire stood unchallenged beneath a sky that didn't rage or bleed. The frost that had lined its walls melted into clear rivulets, trickling down to the courtyards below where wolves lapped at the water as if tasting spring for the first time. But the silence carried weight, the kind left behind by loss, not peace. Liora walked the outer terraces, her boots crunching over the glass-like crust of half-frozen snow. Below her, the glacier stretched for miles, reflecting the pale morning sun. The air shimmered faintly with light, remnants of the magic they'd unleashed. She could still feel it under her skin, a faint hum that pulsed in rhythm with her heartbeat. The spire no longer sang. It breathed. Draven had not left his chambers since the night of the battle. The healers said he would recover, that the bond between them had anchored his soul back to his body. But when Liora saw him, she wasn't sure she believed them. He sat near the tall window, cloak draped loosely around him, his hair a spill of white gold over one shoulder. His sword leaned against the wall, still crusted with frost that refused to melt. He looked less like a king than a memory trying to hold its shape. You should be resting, Liora said quietly. I am, he murmured, without turning. This is what resting looks like when the world doesn't need you to bleed anymore. Liora moved closer. It still needs you. The courts will come calling soon. They will, he agreed. And they'll find a throne without chains for once. He glanced up, his eyes softer than she'd ever seen them. They'll find you. She frowned. You can't mean? You are the mark and the bridge, Liora. The spire listens to you now. It hums in your pulse. It obeys you. It obeys us, she corrected. I didn't do any of this alone. His smile ghosted across his face. You'd be surprised how much you did. She knelt beside him, the ice-cold air catching in her throat. You can't just fade into legend, Draven. He chuckled, the sound rough but real. Every king does eventually. She touched his hand, the one marked by the crescent thorn. The light stirred faintly beneath his skin, answering hers. Not this one, she said. He looked down at their joined hands, at the shared glow between them. You sound certain. I am. She drew a deep breath. Because this time, we aren't sealing the world away from itself. We're opening it. Over the next weeks, the spire began to heal. Listen oversaw the reconstruction of the lower halls, barking orders and cursing poets who tried to immortalize the battle too quickly. Mother Isa returned to her garden of frost herbs and began teaching young acolytes how to listen to ice rather than fear it. The wolves lingered near the bridges, bringing offerings to the newly restored shrines, not sacrifices, but stories scratched into the snow. And the people, the villagers who had once cursed Liora's name, began to arrive. At first, just a handful, then dozens, then hundreds. They came carrying tools, offerings, children. They came to see. They stared at her hair, her pale skin, her strange eyes, but not in fear. This time, they bowed. Liora greeted each with quiet dignity. No one is banished here, she told them. Not for how they're born. Not for what the light calls imperfect. A murmur spread through the crowd. A man stepped forward, an old blacksmith whose hands were scarred by sun and ash. Then what do you call it, my lady? She smiled faintly. Balance. The spire's hum deepened in agreement. At night, she and Draven would walk the halls together. Sometimes they spoke, sometimes they didn't. The silence between them had become something gentle, almost sacred. Once, she asked him, "Do you ever miss what you were before all this?" He considered it. The solitude, perhaps. The certainty. Kingship was simpler when the law was cruelty pretending to be order. Now, it's hope. Hope's harder to rule. Then don't rule it, she said. Live it. He smiled at that. A slow, melting expression that made him look younger than he was. Spoken like someone who doesn't know how to rest. She grinned. I learned from you. Spring came slowly to the north. It didn't announce itself with warmth, but with motion. Dripping icicles, faint green glimmers under the snow, wind that smelled less like salt and more like soil. The spire glittered like a mountain of glass above the thaw. On the first full moon of the season, the court gathered in the Hall of Thorns. This time, not for judgment or war, for a coronation. Liora stood before the dais, dressed not in silk or armor, but in the same pale cloak she had worn the night Draven found her. Its edges were mended but still frayed, a reminder that survival isn't about perfection. Mother Isa performed the rites. By blood and bond, she said, by hunger made home, by night made just, I name you Queen of the Pale Crown. The court knelt. The wolves howled from the walls. Draven stepped forward, crown in hand, not the old one, heavy and jeweled, but a simple circlet of silver and bone. He placed it gently on her head. The white throne has never needed two rulers, he said softly. But I have. Liora's throat tightened. And what of you, Draven? King of frost and patience. What will you be now? He leaned close, voice barely a breath.
A man.
If you'll let me. That night, after the feasts and the oaths, they stood on the spire's highest bridge. The glacier shimmered below like a sleeping sea. Above, the aurora curled in colors the world had never seen before, green fading into violet, then into silver. Liora reached out, tracing the air. The ice is singing again, she said. Draven listened. Not hunger, not pain. No, she agreed. Just life. He turned to her, eyes bright in the moonlight. We could leave it all behind, you know. Let the world find its own balance. Walk south, see what the sun feels like. She smiled. Maybe someday. But not yet. There's too much here, worth rebuilding. Then we build, he said simply. She took his hand, their marks aligning once more. Light rippled outward across the spire, soft and white, weaving through its towers like veins of dawn. The ice beneath them hummed one last time, not as warning, not as plea, as approval. Somewhere deep below, the ancient hunger stirred, not to devour, but to dream. Its voice drifted faintly through the stone, a whisper neither of them would forget. Thank you for teaching me to be full. Draven smiled. Even gods can change, it seems. Only when they're loved, she said quietly. And together, they watched the first sunrise in 1,000 years break over the glacier, slow, pale, and impossibly gentle. The White King thawed. The blight slept, and the girl once left to die became the dawn the world had forgotten how to believe in. And so, the pale girl the world cast away became its light. The king who once ruled by frost learned the weight of warmth, and together they taught even hunger how to love. If this story moved you, if you felt the chill, the ache, and the thaw, then you already know. Even the darkest tales can end in light. Subscribe for more dark fantasy love stories, worlds of shadow, devotion, and impossible grace. New stories rise here every week, and each one remembers your name. Until next time, dream deep, love darker, and never forget. Even in winter, hearts still burn.